Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Loesch. So by now you know about the tragedy unfolding in Afghanistan. The country has fallen to the Taliban despite assurances from the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and President Biden that this could never again happen. Now this exit from Afghanistan, which was originally planned for May 1st, but then moved by the Biden administration to the anniversary of 9/11 for some reason, this exit would not be another Saigon, this administration told us. They promised us this. Well, of course, it's clear now what's transpired in Afghanistan is far worse than either Saigon or Benghazi. The collapse of the Afghan government was so fast, it took just a few days, that thousands of allies, American diplomats, journalists, passport-carrying citizens are trapped inside the country with no way out. To be clear, that situation is still unfolding now as we speak. President Biden has ordered 5,000 troops, 6,000 total, with the addition of 1,000 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division, to go back into Afghanistan to help expedite the evacuation at the Hamid Karzai International Airport there in Kabul. But the Bagram Airport, remember, they closed that, and then the Kabul Air Force, the Kabul airfield, that was kind of taken over as well. So they're securing that airfield, although the Taliban control the perimeter. And it's not clear that there's even actually a place from which to launch any kind of operation to evacuate anybody. Now, American citizens even received a note earlier today advising them to make their way to the Hamid Karzai International Airport, that's the one in Kabul, for evacuation. But at the bottom of that note, it said, and I quote, "Please be advised that the United States government cannot guarantee your security as you make this trip," end quote. The United States cannot guarantee the safety of its own passport-holding citizens. Again, just to be clear how total and complete the takeover of Afghanistan is, the Taliban have already renamed the country. It's the newish name. This was the original before they lost power back in 2001, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Now, reports of the Taliban demanding the daughters of families for the Taliban fighters as their jihadi brides, those are already emerging. Some video too, as are reports and video of executions. Now, again, it's a tragedy. It's a human tragedy that is still too early to even calculate or begin to at the moment. And it could have, and it should have been avoided. Now, of course, all of this happened while President Biden was on vacation in Camp David. He has been MIA, AWOL the entire weekend as this all unfolded, as was Vice President Kamala Harris. Nobody knows where she is either. On Monday, yesterday, President Biden spoke, and when he did, what we witnessed was a president who absolutely punted all responsibility for this complete geopolitical disaster to everyone but him. Now, he said the buck stops with him, and then he immediately absolved himself of all responsibility. Watch.
Decisively, if needed. When I came into office, I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season. There would have been no ceasefire after May 1. There was no agreement protecting our forces after May 1. There was no status quo of stability without American casualties after May 1. There was only a cold reality.
It's a lie. Biden didn't accept any responsibility at all. Instead, he tried to shift the blame on everyone else, beginning with blaming Trump and the Doha Agreement. Now, to be clear, the question was never whether we were going to withdraw. That was a necessity. The question pertained to how we were going to withdraw. So the agreement, the Doha Agreement that Biden's referring to, that was about stopping the Taliban from basically, as I describe it, Airbnb Afghanistan as a terror base for other jihadi groups like they did with al-Qaeda before 9/11. So Trump, on the advice of military counsel, I should add, withdrew all but 2,500 troops, and he, on the advice of military counsel, left them as a residual force. And that was part of the agreement there with the Doha Agreement. Of course, part of Doha Agreement was that the Taliban got to quit being terrorists. More on that in a second. As the withdrawal date grew closer, however, the Taliban, they wouldn't hold up their end of the bargain. In fact, they refused to end association with al-Qaeda, right? Not only that, but they also carried out a terror attack in Kabul that killed 11 people, including an American soldier. And that's, at that point, by the way, that's when Donald Trump, and this is NPR, and this was back in 2019, canceled a proposed meeting with one of the Taliban officials and former President Ghani of Afghanistan that was going to take place at Camp David, because you only have a handful of options when you're dealing with something like this. And that's pretty much in effect when the Doha Agreement was done. So withdrawals seem pretty unlikely But, there's still ways to do it to where it's not a complete cluster. But this is where we need to point out that Biden was no more bound to the Doha Agreement than Trump was to Obama's Iran agreement or the Paris Accord, right? So here's the thing. When Biden took office, one of the first things that he did was reverse the Trump position on the Paris Accord. One of the other things that he did was reverse the Trump position on the Remain in Mexico policy. One of the other things that he did was reverse the Trump position on JPOCA, which was the Iranian agreement. So the fact that he's trying to say that he couldn't reverse position on the Doha agreement when he was the one who changed the extension date from May 1st to September for the 9/11 optic to begin with, and we're supposed to believe this sloppy gaslighting from this barely cogent person? I don't think so. So in other words, Biden acts as if he was bound by this agreement. That's a cop-out. Biden, as I said, the Keystone Pipeline, he backed away. Oh, he wanted to back away from the Abraham Accords. See, the point is a new president has to write or break or remake a deal anytime they want to, anything that hasn't been ratified as a treaty or as conditions on the ground change. And conditions on the ground in Afghanistan, in addition to the other things I mentioned where the Taliban broke the agreement, they changed massively. And the Taliban were they were on the move. They were not honoring their commitments. And yet Biden decided, you know what, I'm going to ignore all of the counsel from the military and I'm going to go ahead with this horrible, ill-conceived plan. So that May deadline that I mentioned, for some reason, Biden wanted that 9/11 optic. I have no idea why. No one does. But he ignored all counsel of his military advisors. They wanted to leave a residual force in Kabul as a precaution while simultaneously increasing diplomacy. Now, Biden had no problem, again, with that Remain in Mexico policy. That was the policy where if you're going to apply for asylum, you remain in Mexico until at which time you see an immigration judge and your case can be heard. He reversed Trump's position on the Paris Accord. Why is he acting like the Doha Agreement was somehow binding? It's a dodge of responsibility, plain and simple. But he didn't stop there. Next, President Biden blamed the Afghan army for the whole sordid mess. Watch this.
We plan for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I will be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision.
I keep coming back to that sentence, without trying to fight. Biden blamed the Afghan military over and over again during the speech. They suffered more casualties than American soldiers. Now, of course, we spent billions of dollars training that Afghan military, but there were huge cultural differences, like, for instance, different tribalist issues, right? And even literacy issues. That all factored into this. There's a huge cultural difference between the United States Army and the Afghan Army. By the way, the Afghan Army was patterned after the U.S. Army. And without full U.S. support, it was uncertain. And guess what? Biden cut off air support to the Afghan Army. But he didn't just cut off air support. He even withdrew the contractors that repair the helicopters and the planes that the Afghan Army used. That's pretty significant. And when you pattern the Afghan Army after the U.S. military, and you actually pattern the Afghan Army to be successful depending upon the involvement of the U.S. military, well, when you withdraw the U.S. military, the Afghan Army collapses because that's how it was designed. How else are you going to explain this? And when you do all of this, by the way, especially before a full evacuation, you close Bagram Air Force Base, you withdraw all air support, before our allies, citizens, diplomats, before anyone was ever evacuated, that's a surefire way to undermine any chance that anyone in the Afghan Army might have it all against a motivated Taliban. You know, those contractors that serviced the Afghan military choppers and planes, the few that they had, they couldn't even use because they didn't have contractors there. Those were withdrawn. Here's the issue. There are no good options for leaving. It's going to be somewhat messy. There were options only that would have prevented the fecal storm that we saw all over the news for the past 24 hours. I mean, we were in Afghanistan originally to rout out al-Qaeda from the country after they used it not just as their headquarters for their terror, but also for their terror training camps. Remember those videos, the obstacle courses? We succeeded in that mission, decentralizing the Taliban, decimating, Latin's important, al-Qaeda. And afterwards, we saw a revolving door of officials yoke an entire generation to this ever-changing mission creep, everyone redefined by a new politician's politics. But the Biden administration, they could have chosen not to close Bagram Air Force Base before evacuating American personnel and allies like interpreters and informants, some of whom, by the way, have been executed already, before we announced our full withdrawal. They could have chosen not to leave behind our military equipment that we taxpayers bought, and now the Taliban they took it and they're going to potentially sell it to China like our drones, and we'll see the Communist Chinese Party reverse engineer that. Great job. They could have chosen, the administration, not to have kept terrorist prisoners alive in all of the prisons in which the Taliban freed them. Here's some video of them, actually. And they added them to their armies on the way to Kabul. There's a lot that we could have done, right? And we could have, the Biden administration could have also waited, and they could have secured the visa process and the SIV, the special immigrant visas, for those allies and those interpreters and those informants, so that we did not have this cluster redacted to deal with when we announced the withdrawal. We could have had all of that ready to go, and we could have also surreptitiously have been taking those individuals out of the country before announcing our withdrawal. But instead, they decided to Leroy Jenkins out of Afghanistan, and now you have this mess. All of this should have been done to prepare for the withdrawal, and Biden knows this because his administration conducted an internal policy review, and they provided him with options. They could have chosen, like I said, that withdrawal date, the visas. I talked about this with my friend Jack Carr on my radio program today. He is a retired Navy SEAL. He served in Afghanistan. You know him as the author of the Terminal series, which Chris Pratt's going to star in on Amazon. The fact that they didn't have these visas situated, and the SIVs, which are common for those allies, the fact that that wasn't done, that there was no foresight into that, is a terrifying idea. No, Biden ordered a rapid and total withdrawal at the onset of the annual fighting season in time for this symbolic target date of 9/11. And why? Because Biden, remember, he likes to celebrate and talk about his foreign policy credentials. He couldn't be bothered or convinced, not even by his more informed military commanders, to reconsider how he was going to withdraw and draw down troops. So he went forward carelessly, foolishly, recklessly. You need to take a look at this exchange between U.S. Army veteran Matt Zeller and NBC's Brian Williams. Brian Williams tried to essentially award Biden a participation trophy for saying that the buck stops with him and taking responsibility. This was on MSNBC last night. Watch this.
Didn't run from it. He owned it. He owned his decision. He owned the fact that, as he put it, the buck stops with him.
I hope he gets to own their deaths too. I feel like I watched a different speech than the rest of you guys. I was appalled. There was such a profound, bold-faced lie in that speech. The idea that we planned for every contingency. I have been personally trying to tell this administration since it took office. I've been trying to tell our government for years that this was coming. We sent them plan after plan on how to evacuate these people. Nobody listened to us. They didn't plan for the evacuation of our Afghan wartime allies. They're trying to conduct it now at the 11th hour. The thing that they were most concerned about was the optics of a chaotic evacuation. Well, they got exactly what they were most concerned of by failing to do what was right when we could have done it.
Brian Williams trying to gaslight an actual veteran when Brian Williams only took pretend fire. This is what I mean when I say that Biden is absolutely passing the buck. He wants to blame the Doha Agreement, but he wasn't bound by it. He wants to blame the Afghan army, but he could have lent them American air support or continued it. And so here's the next card the Biden administration wants to play to try to downplay this debacle. I've seen this media spin. It's the Taliban. It's the kinder, gentler Taliban. They're reasonable. Just grab a cappuccino and sit down and talk to the Taliban about their responsibilities to treat women and people in general with dignity and respect their human rights. They'll listen. The Taliban is just misunderstood after all, which is why you get foolish demands of the Taliban government. Like this. This is from Ned Price. He is the national security advisor in the Biden administration. Listen to this pencil neck.
Additionally, the UN Security Council issued a joint press statement earlier today calling for a new government that is united, inclusive, and representative, including with the full and meaningful participation of women.
See, if they could just stop the rapings and beheadings just for a little bit and make an inclusive government. If you guys could, and the Taliban could just get a little woke, that'd be great. Thanks. See, this is what you do when all you can try to do is absolve yourself from this presidency-ending disaster. You downplay the severity of your catastrophe. Here's the reality on the ground in Afghanistan. The Taliban are detaining people in the street. Take a look at this. Unbelievable. Now, these people that were there beating this person on the street, apparently they were screaming in Pashtun that this individual had assisted the United States, and so he was being penalized for it. And yes, that was a rocket launcher pointed at the civilians. Talk about inclusion and women's rights, right? That's a joke. Yeah, this is a way to distract from the horrific reality of what's going to happen in women in Afghanistan next. Take a look at this video. Brave young Afghan girl who explains exactly how the Taliban treats women.
من 23 سالمه. مطمئناً اگر طالبان کسی رو مثل من، زنی رو مثل من ببینن، به نکاح خودشون در میارن، به تجاوز، نکاح تجاوزی اسلامی، کاری که توی قرآنشون نوشته شده و ما رو غنیمت جنگی میدونن. و من الان احتمالاً در حال استراحت بودم برای سرویس دهی در شب.
Earlier, the Taliban in a press conference says women can have rights, just, within the context of Sharia, so no rights. So people can stop with this inclusion and women's rights talk, like the Taliban is some kind of progressive school administration dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's all an attempt to make what's happening seem less horrific than it is. And if it's passing the buck, rather than owning the reality situation, that's what this is, and that's what Biden is doing. There's going to be no inclusive government. There's not going to be women's rights, sharing of personal pronouns, so they can stop with that. And they can stop pretending that they have any control over the situation. One of the reasons that they had to send more military in is because they didn't give objectives clearly enough to the residual batch that was there. Like I said, U.S. military, they might have secured, which isn't the same as controlled, Bagram Air Force Base. They don't even have control of all of our weaponry. It's fallen into the Taliban's hands. And the Taliban is apparently, they have the periphery around Bagram Air Force Base. Listen to National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on this today. Another joke.
There's no U.S. actions being taken to prevent
this isn't
equipment from
Jake
falling
Sullivan.
into the hands of the Taliban by destroying it or anything else?
I don't have that answer to that question.
You don't have the answer.
General. Yeah.
So that's not Jake Sullivan, but that was another person who was with the Department of Defense. They couldn't say exactly how or what the Taliban had. They couldn't make any guarantees or explain that at all. Jake Sullivan, who is not that man who was with DOD, Jake Sullivan, who was with the National Security, he's the National Security Advisor out of State Department for the president. He said that the president has yet to speak to any world leaders about Afghanistan. Since the country fell to the Taliban, Joe Biden has not spoken to another world leader. This sends such a dangerous message to the world. And that message is that America is apparently lacking any kind of organization, confidence, or foresight. No resolve, making terrible miscalculations, misreading enemies, not listening to wise counsel, and leaving behind Americans. Is that a new thing for America? And betraying our allies. And this message is picked up and exploited by our enemies. I want to show you this because it reaffirms who our enemies are. For all the cozying up with China, our elite do. What do you think China's doing now? How is China helping us? They're mocking and threatening Taiwan. Watch this, or look at this rather. This is on Twitter. China's not pitching in. They're not sending in help. They're not taking any refugees. There's the tweet. They aren't condemning the Taliban. Look at this. They're actually threatening about Taiwan right now. There was a series of tweets. Global Times is an official mouthpiece. That's why it has China state-affiliated media there on the screen and on the tweet. It's because it's run by Beijing, the CCP in Beijing. Yeah, they're expressing support for the Taliban because they help partially fund the Taliban. And they're jeering and mocking what the United States is doing. The Global Times, China's state-run media outlet. Look at this one. They say, quote, "The drastic change in Afghanistan teaches the world a lesson. If the U.S. can't even secure a victory in a rivalry with small countries, how much better could it do in a major power game with China?" Now, I point this out because when you hear companies like Nike or even Blizzard Entertainment, which I can't buy any Call of Duty stuff anymore because of Tencent and CCP's involvement in that. When you watch MLB or anybody else kowtow to the CCP, just know the CCP wishes for our destruction and they're happy to take pictures with the Taliban while they do it. This is who our American corporations are aligning with, by the way. But the real story here is that President Biden, this is a disaster. This is one of the most shameful things that's happened in modern history. maybe in history, but definitely the one in modern history. There's no passing the buck. There's no changing the story. Notice another thing that we're going to keep an eye on. Vice President Kamala Harris is completely missing in action. She is the most unpopular vice president in 15 years, according to numerous polls. She doesn't want 1 ounce of this mess, making her numbers go even lower. Remember, she had to have a whole meeting up in the Hamptons with a bunch of other Democrat women because they were trying to figure out how to rescue her from her super, super high unfavorability rating. And it's like, when you turn the lights on, the cockroaches go scrambling for cover. That's what always happens. I see so many people running from this disaster, this debacle, not even coming up for air. That's what's happening with this administration. And the president has nowhere to hide. He can't stay at Camp David forever. And by the way, why did he go back to Camp David? Jen Psaki in a press conference today couldn't even give an exact time when the president was going to be back at the White House tomorrow. It's literally a 90-minute drive from the White House or a 30-minute helicopter flight. No, right now we're supposed to trust the Taliban. We're at the mercy. This is what the Biden administration has been doing, putting us at the mercy of the Taliban and with a situation that's completely out of the United States' control. So much for Biden's glorified foreign policy expertise. And this is what that diverse cabinet that President Biden put together has yielded: a foreign policy disaster going to haunt America for decades and killed military recruitment for a long time, at least a generation. It's true, after 20 years, there wasn't a good way to end this war, but there were better ways to do it than how Joe Biden did it. He chose the bad way to pull out of Afghanistan and did so in a spectacular, disastrous fashion. And now, whether he likes it or not, anything that happens next is on his hands. And it's on all of the hands of the people who decided to co-sign that administration because they chose this over mean tweets. Are you happy now? We'll get a military man's perspective on this and welcome Lieutenant Colonel Alan West to the program and hear what he has to say about this dereliction of duty in Afghanistan. Find out on the other side. Every morning, The First publishes an email called Up First, and they curate the day's news and the best videos and the must-see moments that everyone's talking about. So if you're not getting this email, you're missing out. Go to thefirsttv.com to sign up today and sign up for free. Welcome back to No Apologies. What you're looking at now, this is moving pictures from this ongoing scene in Afghanistan. Armed Taliban soldiers are going door to door, detaining people in the streets of Kabul. It's only getting worse as time progresses. Don't forget, there's still Americans. We don't know how many. The State Department today in the press conference wouldn't actually give us a number, but they're still there. They're told to shelter in place and they're very much in danger. Let's get some perspective from somebody who knows a thing or two about the operations on the ground in the Middle East. Joining me now, Lieutenant Colonel and candidate for Texas Governor, Colonel Alan West. Always so good to see you, my friend. It's been too long.
Thanks for having me, Dana.
Of course. I have to get your reaction to everything that has happened just in the past 24 to 48 hours in Afghanistan. With my very limited civilian perspective, my thought is if I was going to structure a drawdown of soldiers and presence in an area in a way that was going to most harm America, this is how I would do it. What is your take on everything that's happened?
You're absolutely right. I spent 2.5 years in Afghanistan from 2005, 2007, down in the Kandahar region, southern Afghanistan, working with and training the Afghan National Army there. And just yesterday, I had the opportunity to speak to one of my former interpreter translators that we were able to get out of Afghanistan about 4 or 5 years ago. And he was telling me about the situation, talking to his family. It's absolutely deplorable. And when you consider the fact that we once had control of an air base, Bagram Air Base, and if you want to do a orderly withdrawal and evacuation of non-combatants and civilians and also people that aided us, why didn't we keep Bagram Air Base open? So now we have put our military in a situation where they're completely trapped and they're completely cut off. They're at the Kabul International Airport. There is no other way, unless the Taliban allows it, for aircraft to come in to resupply them, to support them, and we're totally vulnerable. So when Joe Biden accepts responsibility for this and stands by his decision, this is going to be a bloodbath of the proportions that we have not seen since Pol Pot, the killing fields, and also what we saw with ISIS and their takeover. We have allowed the reestablishment of a large Islamic terrorist sanctuary in Afghanistan just two decades after what we saw the Taliban enable to happen to us on 9/11.
Is it realistic to think that the Taliban might get a seat at the UN ahead of the Kurds, Colonel?
You know, when you think about the UN and who they are made up of, despots, dictators, and autocrats, that's very feasible. And when you also understand that part of the United Nations Security Council, you have as permanent members Russia and China has already said that they would recognize a Taliban Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. That lets you know that we should cut ties with the United Nations if they allow a brutal, savage, barbaric terrorist organization like the Taliban to have a seat at the table.
You mentioned too the situation with why in the world they closed Bagram Air Force Base. Isn't it customary when you're working with interpreters and allies and informants that are there helping you meet your objectives and get who you need to get, et cetera? Again, my civilian perspective on this. Isn't it customary to make sure that they're kind of cleared, like they have their special immigrant visas or whatever visas to get them and their family to safety since they put their lives on the line? And from what I get, this wasn't done here. That's, I would imagine, unusual. What happened with that, you think?
Well, if you listen to Joe Biden yesterday, of course, he was blaming everyone. And he said that these individuals who had those SIVs, the special immigrant visas, some time ago, they just did not want to leave. I think that's an absolute abhorrent lie. What we have done is stranded a lot of those individuals. And as you say, the Taliban is going door to door. And I can confirm that from my interpreter translator who spoke with me yesterday and told me about the situation on the ground for his family. So, yes, you're supposed to try to make sure that you get those individuals that have been willing allies that have put their lives on the line, but also the families, the wives and the children of those Afghan commandos and others that have worked with us, and unfortunately they lost their lives. We don't want to see those wives and especially those daughters be left there to be pressed into sex slavery. But then again, Dana, remember that during the Obama administration, the doctor, the Pakistani doctor that helped us to finger Osama bin Laden, well, we allowed him to be put into a jail by the Pakistanis, and he's still there.
My goodness. We're talking with Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, who's also declared as a candidate for governor of Texas. And I know that you saw that photo, 640 refugees that had jumped onto the opening, that ramp on that C-17. And as I understand, some are going to Missouri and then some are coming to Texas as well. And I still think, obviously, there's an important issue of making sure that we're vetting and verifying everyone who's coming in. But we have this issue. And then, of course, overnight, we have the issue of the Biden administration trying to file to stop that judge from making the Biden administration enforce that remain in Mexico policy. I just can't really take this administration seriously, whether it's containing the pandemic or containing any national security threats, when they surely do not want to close the border. Your thoughts on this?
No, you're absolutely right. And when we have a 1,254-mile border here in Texas that is wide open, and now we have once again allowed the Taliban to establish a huge sanctuary for Islamic terrorists, it's only a matter of time before they come here. And what is such a level of hypocrisy when Joe Biden says, well, President Trump left me this agreement and I had to abide by it. Well, he also left him a secure border, but for some odd reason, he did not want to continue on with that policy. He also left him a very strong economy, an America that was energy independent. So it's very interesting how Joe Biden wants to pick and choose which policies of President Trump that he wants to undermine and those he wants to go with. But without a doubt, when you think about how Barack Obama released those 5 senior Taliban generals from Guantanamo Bay, allowed them to go back to Qatar, yes. Well, guess what? Those senior Taliban leaders, those generals are now sitting at the table, and they're part of the new established Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. So the policies of Barack Obama just continue.
And that was the Bo Bergdahl trade, as I understand it, right?
That is correct. That's what we got. We got the traitor. They got 5 senior Taliban leaders who are now back in power.
Oh my goodness. There's going to be a lot more, I'm sure, that we're going to be talking about, Colonel, here coming up in the next weeks as we watch this and as we watch the increased fight over the border. And as everyone around the United States, and particularly Texans too, watch what happens and what that's going to mean. Always good to see you. Allen West, good to see you, my friend. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks.
Of course. All right, folks, while we have been razor focused on Afghanistan, there's a lot of other issues going on in Biden's America. Right now, from the CDC moratorium madness to reopening schools, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp is my guest next to discuss all of it. That's straight ahead. Stay with us. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer himself spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces. He also worked as a CIA contractor. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's mission of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. So this back-to-school year, Black Rifle Coffee Company invites you to enjoy your coffee. Whether you're brewing the perfect cup of pour-over or cracking open a can of 300 to fight all the people who can't drive in the school drop-off lane, Black Rifle Coffee is here to fuel your way, wherever back to school takes you. So head to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to order yours. Use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase in your first coffee club order. Fuel your back to school mornings with America's coffee, Black Rifle Coffee. Welcome back to No Apologies. We've spent a lot of time talking about Afghanistan. We're going to continue to do so and follow that story. But at the same time, you can't forget about the other huge story, the damage being done right here domestically when it comes to coronavirus measures. Schools are in session in parts of the country. Mandates, like in New York City, are being enacted in others, which is insane. You have to have a proof of a vaccine to enter most buildings, apparently, in New York City now. But, you know, de Blasio is against voter ID. The CDC eviction moratorium, that's creating a handful of legal battles on the state level. So much is happening. So let's get some insight from someone at the state level who's been on the front lines of this for quite some time. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who joins us now. Governor, good to see you again, as always. Thank you for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Dana.
Of course. Governor, I have to get your reaction on the Vax Pass, I guess is the funnest way to say it, that's been implemented in New York City and that New York lawmakers are in support of. I can't imagine that Georgians would tolerate, having to show proof of a vaccine to enter a building in Georgia. And don't you think, a second part of this, don't you think that's a little ironic considering it is a form of ID and I thought that ID was bigoted?
Well, I was just shaking my head when you said that about de Blasio doing this and having a vaccine passport, yet they don't support the voter ID requirement when people go to vote. It is really just the height of hypocrisy and lunacy, quite honestly, that you're seeing. I mean, really, to me, all these mandates are doing are dividing people, whether it's masks, vaccine passports, and other things. Everybody's fighting hard to get through COVID. We've all learned a lot. People know what to do. They know how to deal with it. We've got life-saving vaccines, thanks to President Trump and Operation Warp Speed, and people should talk to their medical professionals and people that they trust, their local pharmacists or whoever, and figure out whether that's the right choice for them to make to protect them and their family and others. And I think they should do that, but we don't need government telling them what to do.
Yeah, I think if government was just transparent, people would they'd be convinced to do it all on their own instead of speculating in absence of that information. And that's one thing. I mean, you've worked with some really good medical professionals that advised you throughout all of this. And I don't think every state like New York can say the same. After all is said and done and we saw everything that happened with Andrew Cuomo, of course, I have to get your reaction to that, because if it wasn't them targeting Georgia and your work during the whole lockdown, or Florida or Texas, they were extolling the virtues of New York and how Andrew Cuomo had apparently led that state so brilliantly. As it turns out, he didn't. And now, of course, he's resigning here in just probably a little over a week. Your thoughts on that, Governor?
Well, I think he should have resigned in light of the accusations and the information that's come out. And, I'll let it go at that. I'm trying to stay humble and hard working down here, really focused on the people that elected me, the people of Georgia. And I think it's disappointing sometimes when other leaders try to focus our state in their sights. And, we're doing fine. We're working hard. We're communicating with people. We're talking to our hospital CEOs, and we're working with our schools and a lot of other people to keep things together and fight through this, just like we fought through other COVID spikes that we've seen. This is happening all over the country. And, states that have locked down and done all these mandates, they're no better off than anybody else, except we're doing incredibly well economically because we've taken the measured approach and worked on two things at once, Dana, as we talked about before when I was on your show, protecting lives, but also livelihoods, because to me, that's just as important. My daughter's teaching first grade this year. She just graduated from the University of Georgia, and she said, Dad, don't close the schools down. We got to keep these kids in, because the kids that weren't in pre-K last year, they're just, they're not used to being in a classroom. It's taken us a lot more effort to get them going here in first grade. And I know that that's an issue throughout. And that's the thing that people, they just forget about that. There's a reason The data says we need to have our kids in school. Not that we can't, deal with certain COVID situations that every county or systems may have, but we can fight through that and make it work. And that's what we did all last year here in Georgia.
Yeah, and there's a lot of questions too about whether some of those cases, if there's RSV, that might be conflated with the Delta variant. I know that's something that our health professionals are going to have to explain, because people like me and I even our lawmakers, because this is all so brand new, have questions about. Governor, I wanted to ask you too about this eviction moratorium. This is something that the CDC had stated that any area that has meets a certain criteria for transmission rate, that they were going to have an eviction moratorium. And it was weird to see the CDC call for something like this. You're the governor of Georgia. This is something normally that I would think that the state legislature and you and your advisors would handle, not an agency that is not a law. It's the Centers for Disease Control, not housing control. What is your take on this, and how do you respond to that? The federal government getting involved with what the state is doing in terms of rental agreements?
Well, I'll leave the legalities up to the lawyers, which I'm not one of them. But legally, I don't even know if the president had the legal authority to do what he did. I think he just did it trying to buy time, even though he's probably going to lose in a court of law. We'll see how that plays out. The good thing for us, Dana, here in Georgia is our economy's been open for well over a year. We didn't ever close most of it, and we've given hardworking Georgians a chance. We have the lowest unemployment rate of the 10 most populous states. And so we haven't seen a lot of issues with the evictions that some of the other states may have, or a lot of the worry. Our state agency's been working with the locals to deal and help with those folks that are having issues that were maybe in industries that were displaced early on to COVID, like service, tourism, and other things. But it's incredible how well we're doing. We need more people in the workforce, so I can't imagine that people don't have opportunities out there right now anywhere in the state of Georgia, no matter what part of it you live in.
Exactly, and Georgia is doing really well. Georgia's doing well from last I looked, Governor, with unemployment as well, because I know a lot of states, you just mentioned, they were struggling to find people to go into the workforce. It's difficult, when you're getting paid more to not go into the workforce. But your quick last thoughts on that.
Well, it was killing us down here in a lot of other states, and thankfully a lot of great Republican governors moved very early to end the federal subsidy to unemployment. We believe in having the safety net for those that need it, but we don't need to be paying people more to stay home than we could having them getting in the workforce, having the opportunity to have private sector benefits like health insurance, potentially retirements. There's, we have got so many jobs available in Georgia right now. We've set records with economic development projects this year, an increase of investments up 46%, over $11 billion. 33,000 new job announcements at companies that we've worked with through the department. That's up 5% over last year. And this is in the middle of a global pandemic, and it's because of our measured approach here, and also just giving people an opportunity to survive and fight through this. I mean, I've been a small business owner for 35 years. I know what it's like when you can't pay your bills and you can barely pay your people, and people working for you got more money in their pocket than you have in your bank account. I've been through that multiple times, and I just felt like that's where we were a little over a year ago. And so we had to give people an opportunity to survive. We didn't force them to go open their business back up. We didn't force them to go dine at a restaurant or, go get a haircut or anything else. But people did it because they have to. They got to feed their families. They got to make their payments and put a roof over their head and take care of their kids.
The long trek back to normal. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, sir, always good to see you. Thanks so much for your time today. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, up next, what if I told you that you couldn't talk to your neighbors, that you had to stay shut up in your home? What if I told you that if you wanted to, have a cocktail, you had to poke a hole through your face mask? Sounds kind of crazy, right? Except it's real. We're going to show you some real examples of this insanity that is happening across the world on the other side. Stay with us. Part of why so many Americans resist masks and lockdowns and mandatory vaccinations is because it feels like government overreach, and it feels like that way because it is. There's a feeling that if we let our politicians, they would just go on taking away more freedoms, more and more, all in the name of stopping a disease that can't actually be stopped, especially now It's clear mission creep has occurred. And what I mean is 15 days to slow the spread has turned into masking, distancing, and vaccine forever. Why? Because we got to get to zero COVID zero. That's like the new unstated goal that the world has adopted, except nobody can get to zero because it's a virus. And the fatality rate is like what, or the survivability rate's over 99%. There's no limit, though, to the freedoms that will restrict if we can save one life. That's the current thinking. And the proof, look at the insanity in New Zealand. There was one case detected, one case. And this is what the New Zealand government did. They went back to a full and complete lockdown. Watch this.
Stay local and do not congregate. Don't talk to your neighbours. Please keep to your bubbles. It comes down again to those very simple principles. We know from overseas cases of the Delta variant that it can be spread by people simply walking past one another. So keep those movements outside to the bare minimum, wear a mask, and make sure you keep up that physical distancing.
Oh, this is so dumb. You realize, by the way, that this is an interspecies virus and that animal reservoirs could mean if you accidentally come across a bird or a squirrel, maybe, that's so dumb. Don't talk to neighbors. Keep to your bubbles. They had one case, one unway in Pig Latin. New Zealand goes into total lockdown over that. Now, at this point, can we just admit that some governments don't appear to be planning on ever returning to normal? Because if COVID zero is the goal, you're never going to get to that goal. And New Zealand isn't alone. If you live in Australia, even though Australia averages about 3 deaths per day, here's the latest guidance for their citizens. Look at this.
There will be no removal of masks to consume alcohol outdoors. So you will no longer be able to remove your mask to drink a cocktail at a pop-up beer garden on a footpath as part of a pub crawl.
Is it just me, or have the safety monitors of the world taken over? It's like a collection of all the worst busybodies the world has ever known, handed unlimited power over other people. These politicians don't even flinch as they say the dumbest things ever. I'm trying to get you to understand how in the world, how do you drink without taking your mask off? Do you slide a straw up through it? Do you poke a hole in the N95? What the heck is the point of going to a beer garden in a mask that you can't even remove and take a cold sip of Fastas? I have the worst Australian accent ever. Any protests against all of this in Australia? Nope, because everybody seems fine with it. Maybe this will fire up the Australians when they hear what the government plans to do with their kids, though. Watch this.
I want to stress that to the mums and dads, your children will be well looked after inside when they arrive. They'll be literally ushered. We'll have nurses, we'll have some of the youth command, we'll have some of the young police from the various operations within police there just to guide them through as to where they go. They'll be looked after every moment inside the stadium, and they'll be well cared for. So mums and dads feel secure. We've got about 24,000 students we're aiming to get through next week. The messages will come out this week, and the opportunity is there, but really you've got to take it, grasp it with both hands. I know if you talk to any of our Olympians, I'll tell you, you just got to grasp opportunity, and this is an opportunity, so don't waste it.
Moms and dads feel secure because the government is going to herd your kids into a stadium and you can't go with them and inject them with the vaccine. You can't come. You got to stay out there, outside. HAIL, no. This is like out of a horror movie. I wonder if anybody regrets turning in their guns down there. This kind of authoritarian overreach is happening all over the world. And here's the latest coronavirus overreach from Scotland. It says, quote, government seeks to make emergency COVID powers permanent. The Scottish government wants to keep powers, including the ability to order schools to close and impose lockdowns and end gatherings, end quote. So is this the same country that produced William Wallace? Freedom, Braveheart. Forget the British Army. A virus apparently is all it takes to put the Scots in the fetal position now, it seems. Maybe the West deserves to be defeated. This is weak and passive and afraid it's a virus. One case shuts down New Zealand, 3 deaths a day, and you can't take your mask off to have a beer in Australia. What the West is growing accustomed to is the government, for any reason, restricting any and all freedoms in the name of a false sense of safety against science anytime that they choose. Entire countries have lost freedom, and it's not clear whether they're ever coming back. And as the country who believes in liberty, or is supposed to, above all else, Americans are right to be very concerned, and we're right to push back on any politician who seems to take joy in restricting our freedoms. Otherwise, we just might find out that someday, even in America, maybe they'll cancel your Christmas gatherings, prom, talking with a neighbor, having a drink on without a mask, or some other God-given freedom because of one case of coronavirus. And if you don't believe that it can happen, just look at New Zealand. It already has. To quote Ron DeSantis, how the hell am I supposed to drink a beer with a mask on? That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.